We're now almost 1 week down the track from last week's disastrous, don't know if that's too dramatic, but certainly last week's poor Glasgow Derby performance by Celtic, a game that we lost 3-2 in, despite coming back from 2 goals down. We've spent the week ourselves on the Celtic Exchange and others and message boards and various other places trying to dissect the result and find out just how it happened, because I think it caught a lot of us off guard. But to hear today, to help us find some of the answers, is Greig Robertson, all the way from Boston. Greig, as folks will know from your recent episode, you spent 18 years in the Celtic Academy, working alongside Brendan Rodgers, amongst others. You've watched that game from the States. You've spent time in the last couple of days analysing it. What's your initial early assessment of where that game was won and lost?
Yeah, thanks, Tino. You guys must be struggling for content if you invited me back on for a trilogy. Like every Celtic fan around the globe, massively disappointed with the result. And I think once the dust settles, really taking a deep dive into the stats, into the performance, as opposed to purely the result. This is a results business, particularly the game against Rangers. Everybody wants to win and take the 3 points. But looking more objectively at the performance, there's a lot of positives to take from it. I've got some ideas and suggestions happy to share in terms of how we could have possibly posed Rangers and Barry Ferguson and his team some further questions tactically. But massive disappointment to lose a game, and there'll be no other group of guys more disappointed than the players and staff themselves. Happy to share some insights and share some thoughts, and hopefully maybe stir some more conversation and debate with the fans out there.
I hope so, and I've no doubt about it. So obviously we assessed the game on Monday. It's a game that involves emotion, Robbo, you know that. And we are looking at it 24 hours, less than 24 hours after the final whistle. And your opinions can be clouded at that point. But you yourself, you've taken time in the last 24 to 48 hours, cool heads, looked at it objectively, used various bits of software as well to do. So let me start right off the bat. You've noticed something straight away about Celtic's setup on kickoff. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, this is just minor detail, this one here, Tino, but just watching it. Rangers get kickoff, and there's absolutely one place that it's going. It's going deep and into the corners, either side. I felt we probably just committed slightly too many players that were just going to be eliminated with that first ball. Maybe just leave Maeda just to go and chase down the centre-back or the goalkeeper to put under a little bit of pressure, and then have more bodies in and around the ball to try and compete for that first ball, and ideally then pick up a second ball and try and dictate a little bit of tempo and rhythm right from the start of the game. But what happens is the ball goes long, it kind of bypasses a front three, almost a midfield three. I think it's Schlupp that challenges, comes off them, they get a throw in, and then right off the bat they've got ball in territory, and from that throw in they then get a corner, they get a shot on target, Schmeichel has to palm round the post, they get another corner, leads to a goal. So within 4 minutes, now listen, if we have 10 behind the ball, compete for that first one, does it make a difference? Who knows? I just thought that was maybe just minor detail. That's Rangers' game plan was there for everybody to see, that they were going to try and turn us, get the ball down sides. And I felt that maybe just positionally we could have just anticipated that one a little bit better, and just maybe helped and covered the fullbacks to try and defend that long ball right from kickoff.
Yeah, and it was probably relatively predictable. If Rangers won the toss, you'd like to think Celtic were prepared for all eventualities. If we win it, here's what we do. If they win it, here's what they're likely to do. And we've seen it time after time where the amateur eyes, and I'll make that my assessment. The amateur assessment from my side is that teams frequently target Greg Taylor's left-hand side, as it's more commonly been known. Taylor's not getting any height advantage, but actually it doesn't matter if Taylor's there or not. Schlupp's a big, powerful guy, but teams have still, it could easily have been Alistair Johnson's side, but they've just targeted us in a full-back area, and we've struggled to deal with. And as you say, it's taken 3 to 4 minutes. I don't think Celtic got their half in those 4 minutes. We just took in a lot of pressure, and ultimately we concede. The easy thing to say, well, Raskan's 5 foot whatever. Schlupp, I think, is his marker, who's got a bit of power, a bit of presence, but Raskan gets ahead of him. Where do you see that going wrong? Is that just fortunate the way it's landed, or can we deal with that better as well?
Yeah, I think probably Schlupp will be disappointed in himself that he's allowed Raskin just to get half yard ahead of him and glance that header. But I also think there's maybe a role for Dyson Maeda to be doing in that that kind of front space area, as it's called, just kind of almost in line with the front post, maybe 3-4 yards off the post. Just that area where a lot of teams, if they defend zonal, and Celtic do a mixture of both, that area is a crucial area. You think of the number of corners that land in that area, whether they're driven corners, whether it's just a poor corner, and it lands at that front area. You almost need one of your better headers of the ball in that area. And I think looking back at the goal, absolutely Raskin gets off a Schlupp. But I think Dyson he's not quite aware that Raskin's running kind of off his shoulder. Maybe just a little bit more awareness, maybe being a little bit more aggressive to step forward and attack the ball in that front space. Could have led to maybe just making contact and clearing the box. But you're right, Tino. I think the first 4 minutes, Celtic don't get out of their own half. Rangers have a couple of corners, a couple of throw-ins. And I think even just that first throw-in from the corner, I think it's Rangers set out their stall. I think it takes Tavernier maybe 25-30 seconds to get the throw back in. They were clearly going to just try and unsettle and unbalance Celtic at every opportunity, just break the rhythm and tempo of the game. And I think that some of the stats prove that. I think the dead time in the game was over 48 minutes where the ball's not in play. So that's a huge amount of time. A stat comes from Y-Scout. I certainly didn't. I'm not that nerdy to sit with a stopwatch and count the time in play. But 48 minutes, and I think that would be considerably more than most Celtic games where they have the ball in play and they're dictating the tempo and they're getting rhythm. So Rangers clearly had a game plan just to try and disrupt that at every single opportunity.
You mentioned that stat to me just before coming on, and I could not believe it. 48 minutes of dead time, to use that term. That's half. The game was, I think, 96 minutes long. That's half the allocated time. It blows my mind, and I'll try and dig out and see what the stats are for other Celtic games. But we talk about, I don't know, St Mirren's or Motherwell's or whoever's coming to Celtic Park and running the clock down, whether it's goalkeepers or fullbacks or throw-ins. Rangers have done exactly that, and why shouldn't they? It's Celtic's challenge to overcome that. Maybe the ref can quicken things up, but we'll not go down that road today. But I'm amazed that just about half the time the ball was out of play. Before I forget, then Robbie, you talk about Celtic's defending from set pieces, whether it's corners or free kicks, and it is this mix of zonal and man marking. What's the advantages of having this kind of hybrid approach, or do you prefer one or the other? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I personally, I think my preference would be a kind of hybrid of both. I think the guys on the co-coms on Sunday, speak about players being on both posts, and if there's somebody on both posts, they clear Raskin's header off. It's as a preference, and sometimes it's scouting opposition and seeing where their strengths and weaknesses are, and what methodology to adopt. But I think most kind of have somebody in that front space, have somebody zonal, kind of centre six, probably a couple ringing the box for anything that breaks out for second balls, or even just a little bit deeper inside the box, and generally the rest picking up. And there'll be clear instruction about who goes out if it's a short corner, and adaptation. Just adaptions. Generally, that one in the front space, if the ball is deep to the back post, generally drops down onto the first post to defend that one. But I think everybody at the club will look at that goal and be fairly disappointed that we've not dealt with it better, given Raskin's stature. Yeah,
and as we know, John Kennedy, as a defensive coach, he can have a look at that one for us. Beyond that, Greg, so that's obviously 4 minutes in. Celtic go a goal down, takes all the wind out our sails. Gives the away team and our travelling support, a bit of something to hold on to. And there was real frustration throughout the remainder of the first half that Celtic just really struggled to play of Rangers press. You can get into a bit more detail. It looked like we were trying to go down at the sides and find a route out there, but we were unable to do so. What's your explanations as to why we struggled so much to break that press?
Yeah, just before I go on it, I think the goal in 4 minutes does knock the stuffing out of everybody. And I'll ask you, Tino, as a fan and sitting next to your dad in the stand, how you felt when that goal went in.
Absolutely, you're deflated, and it just it takes a bit of energy. That's Brendan Rodgers himself, and I think Luke McCowan, speaking after a recent game, talked about giving the opposition oxygen. Can't remember who it was against. Maybe it was Hibs, but giving the opposition oxygen in the game. I think that's exactly what happened. Had Celtic scored an early goal, I think Celtic go on and dominate that game. But the opposite happens. So we go from this high point at home, fully expecting to win, to hold on a minute. This isn't in the script. And I think the players and fans alike felt that same way.
I think they did, Tino. And just my point being is, the players, albeit they're professional football players and played, hundreds of games of football and done incredibly well over the years. They are human beings. They do have emotions like everybody else, and that wasn't on the script. And it is a bit of a sucker punch. So, and then when they concede the second, you're at home. It's 2-0. The stadium's, it sucks energy out the stadium, and as you said, it gives oxygen to Rangers. It gives them life. In terms of the build, I think that was an area that we massively struggled at the weekend, and I think Rangers know that we are going to try and build, and we're going to try and play through the thirds. I think the way that they were set up, we were set up in our regular 4-3-3. Obviously missing Callum McGregor, with Engels playing that deep line midfielder, that number 6 role, with the 2 8s ahead of him, McCowan and Hatate in our front three. Rangers in that kind of system that they've adopted for the last couple of games, 3-4-1-2, however you want to slice and dice it. They did cause us problems. They had numbers in the middle of the park, so they were pressing with 2, which is not really common now. It's normally one striker, whether it's a 4-3-3, 4-2-1, 4-5-1, one central striker pressing the 2 centre backs. But they had Czerny and they had Dessers up pressing their 2 centre backs. They had Diamonde just in behind and just locking on to Engels, not allowing us to play central passes and forcing us to play in the wide areas. So a lot of the passes from centre backs were going centre back out to full back. And then they had their inside midfielders, Raskin and Barron, jumping out. But also then they had the additional number of their wing-backs, Tavernier off the right and Sterling off the left to join in. So they ended up getting big numbers out on the sides. And we really, really struggled. Countless times, both full-backs received the ball on the outsides on the touchline, and the really only pass was a straight pass down the line, in which we were then met with their wing-backs. Their outside centre-back was coming joining in, plus their inside midfielder. So they weren't allowed us to play central. They were forcing us on the outside. And then, when we did play on the outsides, they had big numbers out there. They were pressing aggressively and regaining the ball in our defensive third and then allowing them to counter back. And again, just breaking up our regular rhythm.
You've got a couple of really helpful graphics, Greg. So for anyone listening or watching, I'll share these on the Celtic Exchange social media channels, but it shows exactly what you're talking about here, particularly with regard to Dessers and Czerny pressing our 2 centre-halves, which on the day is Cameron Carter-Vickers and Mike Nawrocki, and how they were working very hard to close out our options either into the midfield or out to the wide areas. There's a generally accepted opinion that Mike Nawrocki was one of Celtic's best players on the day. Now, I think Mike Nawrocki, particularly coming in from the cold, had a decent game in terms of didn't really make any mistakes, was fairly steady, and, came through the game without any great note. The issue for me is, although he didn't cause any issues defensively, Celtic's defenders, Celtic's centre-halves are a big part of where our attacks start from. In fact, it's exactly where our attacks start from. And Mike Nawrocki, I think his mindset was just go and get through that game and don't make a mistake. And he done that, but he also wasn't very brave on the ball. He didn't try and find the pass. He didn't try and break the lines. And he constantly passed it safely back to Carter-Vickers and his goalie throughout the 90 minutes. A lot of us, weren't sure how much we would miss a Trusty or even a Liam Scales. But my opinion is that Nawrocki coming in as a replacement really did impact the game. But what did you see there? What's your assessment of that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on, and I think looking at the Y Scout report from the game and some of the detail in the Y Scout report's fantastic. And sometimes it reaffirms what you think you saw in the game, and sometimes it kind of corrects you and gives you some real fascinating objective data. But absolutely, Carter Vickers and Narvoki were, it was square passes. It was back to the goalkeeper. I think missing Trusty on that left side to progress possession, or Scales to progress possession. But also, I think the fact that Rangers were pressing with two strikers up against our two centre backs, I think did pose us some problems. I always look at how can we possibly make some tactical changes without making any substitutions within the kind of structure of the team to maybe try and ask some more questions tactically of the opposition. And I particularly look at, obviously Schlupp played at left back. I personally think that we missed Greg Taylor. I think Greg Taylor creates chaos in his movement coming inside, and I think that's maybe something that we missed with the fullbacks maybe inverting a little bit and giving us another number in the middle of the park alongside Arnie Engels. I think Engels it's a big distance to cover to try and support the fullbacks and outside. So when Carter Vickers gets it and he plays it to Johnson on the right hand side, and Engels is trying to go over and support along with McCown, it can be a big distance. Whereas if you have a fullback coming in, maybe supporting off the back of him, or even maybe for a spell going 4-2-3-1. I know it's maybe not Hatate's or Engels' favoured position as two kind of holding midfielders, but maybe for a spell going 4-2-3-1, asking Rangers that problem. What do they do to try and solve that? So if you have 2 6s playing against Diamonde, splitting them, playing either side of them, do they then jump Barron or Raskin to match up? And then it maybe leaves you Luke McCown, you kind of 1v1 in a more advanced midfield area. So I think there was maybe ways in which we could have tried to progress the ball a little bit better, either with fullback coming in. And Schlupp's played in the Premier League as a central midfielder. I think that was probably maybe a natural one, even for a spell of the game. When we have a goal kick and we're building it, we could have maybe built, with the two centre backs, the goalkeeper and Alistair Johnson slightly lower, so we have 3 outfield players playing against their 2 central strikers. We put inside, so maybe then be like a 3-4-3. The Engels, and now you've got 4 midfielders playing against their 3 midfielders, and then 3 behind who are playing against 2 central strikers. We've maybe got a spare man, and then we can maybe find a spare man in the middle of the park, which will maybe allow us to progress possession. Front 3 stay up high. It might then pin their wing backs back a little bit. So I think there's maybe 1 or 2 things, and this is far from me. And hindsight is an incredible thing. Far from me to be telling the Celtic manager and the coaching team, changes or adaptations. But I always just think it's fascinating. And with our teams here, we always encourage our coaches, without making a substitution, how can you change and try and affect the game with the players that are on the pitch? And it might not be a radical tactical change. It might just be, when we're building the play, we're going to set up like X. And when we're defending, we revert back to Y. So I think there's maybe a couple of options in which we could have kind of slightly changed the shape of our team, just to try and maybe, give us some different passing lines, different passing angles, and help the players maybe try and secure possession a little bit and keep the ball in the park for a little bit longer. But as you mentioned there, I've got a couple of graphics that we can share with the listeners, and it'll maybe become a little bit clearer, some of the ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've proposed 2, if not 3 options, and as you say, they're just suggestions, whether Brendan and the guys take them up or not, but they're suggestions as to how Celtic might, with the benefit of hindsight, have got out better and more effectively across the game. And again, we'll share these on the socials. The puzzler for me, Greg, is that Brendan Rodgers, very experienced coach, John Kennedy, also now very experienced Gavin Strack and Adam Sadler, they will have seen and identified early on how Rangers had set up. It was a wee bit of a surprise-ish. The Rangers have gone 3-5-2, 3-4-1-2, whatever version you want to look at. And they'll have noticed early that Dessers and Czerny are the trigger. They're the guys that start the press, and everything else comes behind that. are you a wee bit surprised that on that note, they'll have been well aware of it, but are you a wee bit surprised that they then never changed it? Or do you think the manager might have been reluctant to change in game? Maybe he thought, let's get to half time and I can spend time explaining this rather than try and do it off the hop?
Yeah, listen, I'm proposing some, some alterations to the shape, but the reality is that Brendan and the guys have stuck with plan A. They've come out in the second half. They've corrected a few things. They've probably had some choice words, and they've got themselves back to 2-2. Now, I'm sure everybody in that stadium, with the exception of the 7,000 in the corner, are expecting Celtic to go on and score a winner, or at worst to walk away with a 2-2. So, with that in mind, I think that's sticking with what they were doing and how they were playing, they get themselves back in the game. And the second half is a different Celtic team that came out. So yeah, it's a tricky one. He could change shape. He could go 3-box-3, and before you know it, you come in at half time 3-0 down. I don't think the two goals that Rangers scored, the first one, obviously, we've spoke about the corner. It's disappointing. The second one, I just think both midfielders managed to run off our midfielders off the back of them. I don't think we're quite switched on and quite aware. And then maybe Alistair Johnson, when he watches the second goal back, probably should smell the danger of Diamonde breaking into the box. I know he's got Czerny to deal with, but Czerny's probably the lesser of two evils. He's on his outside shoulder, where he should maybe then just get a little bit closer to Diamonde arriving in the box, who ultimately scores a goal. So you look at the two goals, and apart from that, do Rangers do a great deal? Not really. Celtic probably think to themselves, we can't play much worse than we did in the first half. Let's tidy up a few things at half time. As I said, there's probably a few choice words. Just raise everything. Just the passing was off, the intensity wasn't there. It just wasn't. It wasn't the Celtic team that we've known to see this season. But the second half's totally different. So that token, the manager's totally justified. Sticking with plan A. Let's just do it better.
Before we get to the second half, and obviously it is a lot better, or at least for most of the second half, it's a lot better before that kind of killer fifth goal in the game. Callum McGregor, you're a huge fan, Greg. I know you worked with him, at various age groups as he made his way through the academy, and the debate rages on as to how impactful he is, in and out this Celtic side. But you speak about the patience and the tempo he sets, and just how important he is. Just how much did Celtic miss him, and why did they miss him?
He was massive. He was massive, Tino. I just think he's so experienced in that fixture. Not always just about what he does on the ball. I just think his leadership qualities, the standards, how you deal with that, going a goal down after 4 minutes, organising people on and off the ball. I know that in the last couple of games they've kind of gone a 10 just to man mark Callum McGregor. But Callum's movement's clever. He'll take people out the way to maybe open up a passing line, into the next line, into the 8 or into the centre forwards. I just think he's experienced. And I think they're the ones that Celtic missed at the weekend. Like, I think relationships and connections on the field are so important. And I think sometimes we just think we can take a player out and we can replace with another player. If you look at the kind of key relationships that players have, particularly in that back four, Schmeichel's playing with a new left centre-back. Carter Vickers is playing with a new left centre-back. Schlupp is playing with a new centre-back inside him. Engels and Cameron Carter Vickers are not normal kind of connections. Engels is normally up another line. So I think that does have an impact in just knowing little nuances about movements of players. Carter Vickers and McGregor, or Carter Vickers trusting McGregor, that kind of triangle will be so versed on movements from one another, triggers from one another. And I look at some of the numbers and some of the data. I think Arnie Engels, I think he had 52 passes in the game, and for a Celtic number 6, I probably expect Callum, maybe not in a game like Rangers in the way that Rangers defended against him, but Callum will normally hit, 3 figures, over 100 passes a game, there or thereabouts. So if your controller in the game is not being effective, and that is no criticism of Arne Engels. I think Arne Engels is an absolutely fantastic player. I don't think that's his best position as a 6. And then when he's playing in there and he's really struggling to get on the ball, a little bit of lack of experience playing in there, I just think everything around not having Callum in the team hurt us on Sunday. I really do.
Just on the Arne Engels thing, Arne Engels has been here since end of August, and he's played from the end of August until March as a number 8, i.e. one of the 2 more advanced midfielders in Celtic's setup. I, again, from an amateur viewpoint, thought he can go in and do the 6. He's got the capabilities to go and do the 6. But if I play you there somewhere for 40 games and then on game 41 say, now go and be a 6, which is quite a specialist role, and Callum McGregor's grown a specialist role, it's little wonder, and I'm not making excuses for him, I'm a big fan, but it's little wonder that Engels struggled. But into the bargain, Greg, he struggled in the 6. I think we also missed him in the 8. Can you tell us your thoughts on the bearing that had in the game? Because he has been very effective in that more advanced position.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the kind of key Celtic patterns is these kind of wide triangles that they create all the time. And the wide triangles is generally created by the fullback, the winger, and the ball side 8. So if you're thinking down the right hand side, Alistair Johnston, Kuhn, and maybe an Arne Engels. If the winger comes a little bit deeper and a little bit shorter, then the Engels takes off and runs in behind. And you normally have brilliant third-man run combinations. One, I think Rangers nullified that by having so many bodies out in the wide area, because that's one of Celtic's strengths. But also, you lose then the running power of Arne Engels to go and disrupt Rangers' backline and run in beyond. So I think that was a miss. So again, I think that disrupts the team again. McCowan, I think, gave us great energy within the team. And back to maybe earlier point about Engels playing in the 6 role, that's why I thought maybe just for a spell you go a double pivot. You maybe bring Hatate down with Engels, and you give him a little bit of help, somebody alongside him. And again, asking that question of Rangers, how do they then adapt it? Does Ferguson and these guys notice that change? How do they change to try and combat it? Does it allow us just to get on the ball a little bit easier, rotate the ball, get our tempo and our intensity in the game that we know that we like? So, without making excuses, I just think there was quite a lot of kind of changes to the dynamics of the team. Maybe some of the same players. What I think it maybe highlights, you take McGregor out the team, Engels played in there. We don't really have another number 6. That if McGregor's injured, suspended, where we maybe get away with Engels playing in there. I know Paulo Bernardo is injured, but again, more of an 8. That's maybe an area that maybe Celtic need to focus on the recruitment in the next window, the window after, of looking about a succession planning either internally at the academy. I know there's a couple of young kids in the academy who are doing fantastically well, 1 or 2 in that position. But that's something that I'm sure the recruitment guys are looking at. But I just think we missed, and I think there was a few players who particularly in that first half, just didn't hit the form that they've been used to. So I think you throw everything into the mix. I think it absolutely makes for a disastrous first half.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we saw, unfortunately. Just in terms of Callum McGregor, I think and hope that the work will already be underway in terms of a succession plan. And I'm saying this with every respect for a player who I think's still got a long way to go as a Celtic captain and a Celtic player. But at some point, he'll be 32 this summer, I think. And those fixtures stack up and, 50, 60 games a season. I know there is the young boy, Kel Uri, is that what you call him? Kel Uri, and the B team, who's just signed a new deal and he seems to be well liked. I also know I was at an event that Brendan Rodgers spoke at where he spoke of his desire to keep Tomoki Iwata. He saw a lot of talent there, but he couldn't guarantee Iwata first team starts and minutes. And at his age and stage in his career, the player wanted to move on. And ironically, he finds himself at Birmingham with Chris Davies, Brendan Rodgers' former number 2. But it does seem that the manager has been keen to find someone for that position. I think we will sign there in the summer, but we'll see. As we know, so first half couldn't have really gone much worse. You're 2-0 down and, you're chasing the game. But Celtic do respond well. And I'd be keen to hear your thoughts if there were any great tactical changes, or, to your earlier point, was it just doing what we know we can do but doing it so much better. We get the first goal back after 4 minutes, Greg. Any notable changes, or were we just a bit sharper in the second half?
I think that was it, Tino. To be honest with you, I think they've probably known themselves when they've come in the changing room at half time that they've let themselves down, the fans down, and nowhere near good enough. So I think they've probably recognised that themselves and just upped everything in the second half. Listen, this for Rangers, it was a free hit for Rangers, an absolute free hit. They're coming off the back of, a positive two-legged games against Fenerbahce. They're riding high. Everybody's speaking about tired legs, etc. They are finely tuned, and they get the energy in that first half. It is so much easier to be the antagonist than the protagonist. Celtic are the ones that are having to create. It's easier to destruct and construct. So Rangers in their shape, clearly, their game plan is to break things up and hitting the counter attack and play off a set plays, etc. Celtic are the ones that are going to have to take the bull by the horn and make things happen, particularly at home with the fans behind you. So I really just think it was the second half that we just need to get back and back to playing the way we can with a little bit more intensity and purpose, and getting that goal so early on just lifts the fan. And I tell you, I don't know if it's coincidence or not, but Maeda scores, having been moved back out to the wide area. You see his header's fantastic. He leaps like a salmon at the back post. Some say Larsson-esque. His leap at the back post, but it's coming in off the side as opposed to being the central striker. So again, maybe some food for thought. You look at a lot of Dyson's goals throughout this season. He arrives in at the back post or just inside the back post and then crashing the box late and fast. So that's maybe a small point to for people to think about and consider.
Yeah, of course, and I'm saying no great tactical changes, and I think we can agree that's been the case. But personnel has changed. Nicholas Kuhn, who just didn't get going and has dropped off a wee bit in recent weeks, he was replaced. Adam Ida comes into the central position. Jota goes to the right. Maeda goes to the left. And as you say, lo and behold, Maeda does what he's been doing all season. That was his 28th goal of the season, I think, and it's 4 minutes into the half. And all of a sudden, Celtic have got the momentum. And as we know, we're going to get that second a bit later on through Rio Hatate. But I find it really interesting, your point about protagonist v antagonist. We witnessed it at first hand the other way around when Celtic played Barcelona in 2012, 7th of November 2012, if I've got that date right. We were just out to spoil, and we were right to do so. Celtic, man for man, couldn't compete with the Messis, the Xavis, the Iniestas, whoever else was playing on that night. Neil Lennon set the team up in a certain way to force Barcelona wide, actually, to encourage them to throw it in the box where our centre-halves would clear it all day long. And you need a bit of luck on the day, and you need a few things to go your way. Celtic get the goal up, Wanyama with a crashing header at the back post, and then Tony Watt later on when the game is stretched. But we were the antagonist, if I've got my terms right there, on that occasion. We were out there to spoil and hope for the best. And sometimes you can do that 100 times and get the result 5 times out of 100. So it's not being dismissive. Rangers got their win, and there's no sour grapes there. You could debate they deserved that if you want to. But the way they chose to play, and maybe Barry Ferguson's right to have set them up in such a way based on the personnel available to him, but the way they chose to play is nowhere near as complex or detailed as how Celtic were trying to play. There's more instruction, and it's more... it's harder to do, basically. It's easier to come out and spoil, but that's part of the game. And again, it's Celtic's challenge, isn't it, to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's also a sign of respect as well that they know that Celtic will cut them open. If they try and really go kind of toe to toe and maybe in a 4-3-3, they know that the problems that's caused them in the past. I think looking at the stats and the breakdown, Celtic dominating every metric in the game, and that's with having a fairly poor first half. Looking at the XG stats, which is the expected goals, Celtic are 1.48, Rangers are 0.8. Shots on target, we outscore them 14-8. Possession 70-30. Even number of passes. You know, we attempt 545 passes to their 198. So little things like that tell you a story. Kind of passes allowed per defensive action. So that kind of stat tells you pressing intensity and purpose. We allow Rangers 6.5 passes before we regain possession. Rangers are 12.2 passes. So it tells you whenever they turn over possession, they're quite happy just to drop off and be compact and say to Celtic, you know, come at us and come and break us down. And I know that people will come back and say, listen, at this level, there is only one stat that counts, and it's the goals, and that's absolutely correct. But for me, I think there's a way of playing. I think there's a style of play. I don't think Celtic fans would accept, you know, being the antagonist and sitting back, particularly against Rangers or domestic games, whoever it may be. I just think there's a way in which Celtic people expect Celtic to play, you know, and it's wingers high and wide, you know, it's attacking midfielders. I think you can almost look and profile Celtic players just by looking at the players we've had over the years, like a Billy McNeil, centre back, get the ball down, play, but can defend the box. Paul McStay, midfielders, box to box, wingers. You know, I think there's just a way ingrained in Celtic to play, and I don't think that any manager, I think, would set up a team, particularly domestically, to play that way. So I just think it's disappointing the manner in which the game plays out. First half, you know, you can pick the bones out, and we had, you know, looked at a few kind of situations there. Find yourself 2 down, get back in the game 2 each, and I think it looks as if there's only going to be one winner. And really at that stage, if you can't win it now, let's not lose it. Let's not lose it. But unfortunately, we did.
Yeah. So you've got to that point, and it's ideally we'd like to avoid that part of the game, but we can't ignore it. You were looking again, just as part of your analysis, at our setup, not just defensively, Greg, just as a team for that decisive final goal by Igaman. Talk us through that, and as quickly as you can, please. We don't want to dwell on it. But talk us through that part of the game.
Yeah, listen, I think when the goalkeeper gets an assist, I think that's quite alarming. And Butland assists Sigeman for the goal, and I think for one ball to eliminate our whole team. And I know that we could very quickly kind of pick the bones out of it. I think at that stage there, Butland's made 4 passes in his own half. Every other ball has been sent into Celtic's half. At 88 or 89 minutes, there's only one place that ball's going. So probably me, I'm looking at, you know, the personnel on the pitch at that point. I'm probably trying to get my team into a 4-5-1, maybe leave McCowan up as the 1, get Adam Ida down right in the middle of a midfield 5, wingers drop down, and try and get somebody in that midfield 3 then to compete for the first ball. Don't allow your centre-backs to come and compete for the first ball. Have one of the midfielders, and that way, if what happened to Carter Vickers happens to a midfielder, you've still got a little bit of security in behind. So Butland's ball just eliminates, you know, 6 Celtic players, and then before you know it, Carter Vickers is having to compete for the first one. He mistimes it. He goes over his head. Schlupp, I think, is a little bit out of position. And then obviously in the back pedal, Alistair Johnson trips and falls. So one direct ball eliminates everybody, breaks to the Rangers striker. But then I still think we managed to get bodies back in and around it. And I think Narvoki can maybe get a little bit closer and get a block in. Carter Vickers gets himself back. Johnson gets a slide in. I just think it's a really, really soft goal to concede. And I know the coaching staff, you know, will be hugely disappointed with that, as will the players. But I just feel that just the organisation at that point, you know, we've been back to 2 each. If we go away at that point, you know, it's, you know, coming back from 2-0 down, it finishes 2-2. It kind of feels a little bit more like a win. They probably feel a little bit more like a loss, and not to defend that one long ball. I just think maybe, or structurally, we could have had the team down a little bit more compact, a little bit deeper, attacked that first one, and who knows, going up the park and scored a winner.
Who knows, indeed. And you've seen if you're not sure the reaction of the players and how disappointed they were, a number of them hit the deck at that moment, Celtic players, in frustration as much as anything at how they had dragged themselves back into that game. Momentum's huge in football, I always say that, and everything was pointing towards a Celtic win. And to switch off, for that crucial moment, it has cost us badly. Greig, just quickly, we're coming towards the end of the piece, but very quickly, your thoughts. Cameron Carter-Vickers, in my opinion, had one of his poorest games in a Celtic shirt, alongside Alistair Johnson. Two guys very experienced in that fixture, very effective in that fixture. Two guys that know what it's all about, but they were amongst the worst culprits, unfortunately, on the day. Anything you can point that towards? Just it can happen to anyone having an off day, or was there anything more to it?
I think a few of them had an off day. To be honest with you, I just think passes were a little bit short. They were a little bit under hit sometimes, not with the same intensity. I just felt I felt like we just needed another body in the middle of the park. I think just to help build and progress possession. And I think that Greg Taylor over the years has done that fantastically well, where he inverts. It becomes almost like a second six alongside Callum McGregor, and then he'll jump a line and become like a left-sided 8, and then he'll go back on the outside and play almost like a winger or run in between the left winger and the centre forward. I just think that chaos. I just felt it was just a little bit too clinical and a little bit too sterile. I think everything was really linear. It was Carter-Vickers either back to left centre back or Carter-Vickers out to Johnson. Johnson was then playing a straight ball right down the line, and that was feeding into what Rangers, the traps that were setting for us and they were looking for. And just as you're saying, like, momentum is a huge thing in football. Looking at the ball possession stats, when Celtic get the goal, the first one, we have 83% ball possession. So that swing, when we come out in the second half, we really set the tempo and intensity, and we capitalise on that, and everything's tails are up then. So momentum is a huge thing in football. But listen, I think it was a first half to forget for a lot of the players, and they'll absolutely know that themselves. The standards that they've set. And looking at another stat which didn't come directly from the game, I think going into the game, Celtic had picked up 48 points and Rangers 8 in the last number of fixtures. So any mathematicians out there can add those two together and tell us in how many games that is a result of. But 48 points to 11 now, I don't think we can forget the good work that's been done over the last number of seasons and the good work that's been done this season. You look at the highs in the Champions League, you look at some of the great performances. I don't think, I know this is a sore one and this will still be a sore one, until we go to Ibrox and right this wrong, it'll still be sore. But I think we need to remember and look at the way that the team's trying to play, and as an entertainment's business, I think they do entertain vast majority of the time. The guys had an off day and they picked the wrong one to have an off day.
Yeah, they sure did. There's so much more we could go into. I know you're keen at some point, and we'll catch this on a future episode to talk about set plays for and against Celtic. There's the impact that Kasper Schmeichel had on the game, particularly during that first half. I'm a big Yang fan. I thought Yang came on and done okay. Did Adamida do enough, and so on and so forth. But all stuff for a future episode, Greg. Just in the meantime, your very final thoughts. Some great insight today. Really enjoyed it. But any final thoughts as we wrap this one up?
Yeah, I think I think it's probably one that got away. To be honest, I think it's given the second half performance, the comeback, the couple of half chances that we get in the second half at 2 each. I think it's one that got away. 2-2. Given the start that we had, would probably been fair. 3-2 is a real sickener for everyone. But I think we need to remind ourselves, state of play in the league table, the progression in Champions League. Look to build on that. There's some great stuff going on. We've got an incredible manager in Brendan Rodgers. Great backroom staff there. We've got some really good young talent coming through at the club. I know I would certainly. What kind of football I'd like to be watching week in, week out, and be the team that's entertaining and exciting. And hopefully after this wretched international break, the guys can get back on the saddle and put a smile back in our face. I know they'll be desperate to put that shirt back on and and get going. God love the team that we're playing against after the international break. Who is that, Tino?
Hearts next weekend.
Scud them.
And that'll be that. So no Rodgers out shouts from yourself just yet, far from it. Greg, thanks for joining us. Some brilliant insights, as I mentioned. We'll be looking to get Greg back on in future episodes. But in the meantime, let us know any comments on this one. We will share those graphics on social media, which gives a wee bit of explanation on how Rangers were pressing and some suggestions from Greg as to how we could combat that. So we'll share them on socials. But in the meantime, thanks for joining us for this one. Greg, thanks for joining us all the way from sunny Boston. We'll catch you all again really soon.
Thanks, Tino. Thanks, guys.